The static was louder than usual tonight, a low, hungry crackle that seemed to crawl up the walls and settle in my bones. I tapped the mic, checked the levels, and tried to ignore the way the fluorescent lights above me flickered in time with the interference. Midnight at KXRC always felt a little off, but tonight the air was thick with something I couldn't name. I cleared my throat, ready to launch into the weather report, when the static surged, swallowing my words. For a moment, I thought I heard a voice buried in the noise, a whisper, too faint to catch, but sharp enough to make my skin prickle. I leaned closer to the console, heart thumping. If you're just tuning in, this is KXRC, broadcasting live from the edge of nowhere. Stay with us for... The static cut me off again, this time with a burst of garbled syllables. I froze. The voice was back, clearer now, threading through the white noise. Don't change the dial. The words were slow, deliberate, and wrong, like someone learning to speak for the first time. I yanked off my headphones, but the voice kept coming, echoing from the speakers. You're not alone. Not tonight. My hands shook as I reached for the emergency switch, but the board was dead, every light blinking in a pattern I'd never seen. The clock on the wall spun backward, numbers blurring. I stared at the mic, breath shallow, as the voice whispered one last warning. Follow the rules, or you'll never leave. The static faded, leaving only silence and the pounding of my heart. The drive out to KXRC was a test of nerves in itself. The road wound through endless pine forests, the kind that swallowed headlights and made you feel like you were the last person left on Earth. My phone lost signal 20 miles back, and the only company I had was the hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of deer eyes in the trees. The station finally appeared around a bend. A squat concrete building perched on a hill, its red tower light blinking against the starless sky. There were no other cars in the lot, just a dusting of frost on the gravel and the distant howl of wind threading through the trees. I killed the engine and stepped out, breath fogging in the cold. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint buzz of the tower and the crunch of my boots. The front door was heavy, painted a faded blue, and it groaned as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, tinged with old coffee and something metallic. The lobby was small, cluttered with outdated flyers and a battered couch that looked like it had been rescued from a roadside dump. A single lamp cast a weak pool of light over the front desk, where a stack of logbooks sat untouched. I called out, half expecting no answer, but a voice drifted from down the hall. Back here. It was Tom, the day manager, who'd interviewed me over the phone. He looked older in person, with deep lines around his eyes and a nervous energy that made him seem always on the verge of leaving. He shook my hand, his grip cold and quick. Glad you made it. Most people get lost for the first time. He led me through a narrow hallway lined with faded band posters and yellowed emergency procedures. The walls were scuffed, the carpet worn thin. We don't get many visitors, Tom said, glancing over his shoulder. Signal barely reaches the next town, but the regulars tune in. The night shift's quiet, mostly. Just you, the music, and the static. We passed the break room, a cramped space with a humming fridge and a coffee pot that looked older than me. The only other sign of life was a corkboard covered in cryptic notes and a faded photo of a DJ I didn't recognize. Tom stopped at a heavy door marked Studio A. He fished out a ring of keys, unlocking it with a practiced twist. Here's where the magic happens. The studio was a time capsule. Analog boards, stacks of vinyl, a battered microphone, and a window looking out into the blackness. The only light came from the console, its dials glowing green and orange. Tom handed me a worn binder. "Everything you need is in here. Schedules, emergency numbers, and," he hesitated, "the rules. Read them. Follow them. It's just how we do things here." He left me alone in the studio, the door clicking shut behind him. I stood in the glow of the console, the silence pressing in, and wondered what exactly I'd signed up for. I set my backpack down and flipped open the binder Tom had handed me. The first few pages were what you'd expect: emergency contacts, a rundown of the equipment, a playlist for the night. But tucked between the log sheets was a single sheet of paper, yellowed at the edges and covered in neat, blocky handwriting. At the top, in red ink, it read, "KXRC Night Shift Broadcast Rules." Underneath, a warning: "These are not suggestions. Do not ignore them." I scanned the list, half expecting a joke, but the rules were stranger than anything I'd imagined. 1. Always start your shift by playing the station jingle. Never skip it, even if you're running late. That seemed harmless enough, just a quirky tradition. I'd heard the jingle on my drive in, a cheesy, synth-heavy tune that stuck in your head. 2. Never play Midnight Train after 12:30 a.m. I frowned. The song was circled on the playlist, but there was no explanation. Just a note: "Trust us." 3. If the request line rings and the caller doesn't say their name, hang up immediately. Do not engage. That one made me pause. I'd worked radio before, and prank calls were part of the job, but this felt different. The word "immediately" was underlined 3 times. 4. At the top of every hour, read the weather report, even if the system says there's no update. Routine, but the emphasis was odd. Why force a weather report when nothing has changed? 5. If you hear static that sounds like whispering, turn off the main mic and wait exactly 60 seconds before resuming. Do not speak during this time. My skin prickled. I glanced at the mic, suddenly aware of how alone I was in the building. 6. Never look directly into the studio window between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. If you see movement, ignore it. I looked at the window, its glass reflecting only the dim glow of the console. The idea of something moving out there, unseen, made my stomach twist. 7. If a song starts playing that you didn't cue, let it finish. Do not try to stop it. I scribbled a question mark in the margin. Equipment glitches happened, but this sounded like something else. 8. At 3:33 a.m., play the recording labeled "Night Signal." Do not listen to it off air. Do not skip it. There was a cassette tape in the rack, marked with a piece of masking tape and those same words, "Night Signal." I made a mental note to find it later. 9. If you hear someone calling your name from the hallway, do not leave the studio, no matter what. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how thin the walls were, how the hallway outside seemed to stretch on forever. 10. Always sign off with the phrase, "KXRC, keeping you company through the night." Never change the sign-off. A chill ran down my spine. The rules started simple, but by the end, they felt like a warning from someone who'd seen too much. At the bottom, in Tom's handwriting, was a final note. If you have questions, don't ask them on air. And whatever happens, don't break the rules. Not even once. I stared at the list, the silence of the studio pressing in. Some rules felt like harmless rituals, but others hinted at something darker, something waiting for a mistake. I folded the paper and slipped it into my pocket, heart pounding, curiosity and dread warring inside me. The night was just beginning, and already I felt like I was in over my head. I settled into the creaky chair, headphones snug over my ears, and took a steadying breath. The clock on the console ticked over to midnight. I queued up the station jingle, just like the first rule said, and let the synthy melody fill the airwaves. The sound was oddly comforting, a thin thread of normalcy in a place that already felt anything but. The playlist for the first hour was mostly classic rock and local ads. I read the weather report at the top of the hour, even though the forecast hadn't changed in days. The words felt hollow, but I followed the rules, glancing at the list every few minutes as if it might change when I wasn't looking. The request line blinked to life at 12:17 a.m. I hesitated, remembering the rule about callers. I picked up, voice steady. KXRC, you're on the air? Who am I speaking with? There was a pause, then a woman's voice, soft and distant. You know who I am. The line crackled. I want to hear Midnight Train. My hand hovered over the playlist. The song was right there, but the rule was clear, never after 12:30. I checked the clock, still safe. Coming right up, I said, but the line had already gone dead. I played the song, watching the seconds tick by. As the last notes faded, the static on the monitor deepened, a low, whispering undertone threading through the silence. I leaned closer, heart thumping. The whispers almost sounded like words, but I couldn't make them out. I remembered the rule: if the static whispers, turn off the mic and wait. I flicked the switch, counting out 60 seconds in my head. The static faded, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. When I turned the mic back on, the request line was blinking again. I answered, careful this time. KXRC, who's calling? A man's voice, cheerful and too familiar, replied, You're doing great, Sam. Don't forget the weather. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone my name on air. Who is this? I asked, but the line went dead, replaced by a faint, rhythmic tapping. I tried to shake it off, blaming nerves and the late hour. I played another song, then another, but the sense of being watched grew with every minute. The studio window reflected only my own face, pale and uncertain, but I kept glancing at it, half expecting to see someone or something move behind the glass. At 1 a.m., I read the weather again, voice trembling just a little. The static was gone, but the air felt charged, as if the whole building was holding its breath. I checked the rules, running my finger down the list. So far, I've done everything right. But the night was young, and the oddities were piling up. A final call came in before the hour ended. This time, the voice was a child's, whispering, Don't look at the window. The line clicked off before I could respond. I stared at the glass, heart pounding, and forced myself to look away. The rules were clear. I followed them, but the unease lingered, thick as the static that haunted the airwaves. The first hour was over, but I knew the real test was just beginning. By 1:15, the studio felt smaller, the air heavier. I tried to focus on the routine, queuing up tracks, reading ad copy, checking the transmitter levels, but my mind kept drifting back to the rules. They seemed ridiculous in the harsh light of the console. Don't answer nameless callers, don't look at the window, don't play certain songs. I'd worked radio gigs before, and the only rules that mattered were FCC regulations and not falling asleep on air. I pulled out my phone, half hoping for a signal, but the screen was blank. The landline on the desk was my only link to the outside world. I dialed Tom's number, needing to hear a real voice. He picked up on the second ring, sounding groggy. Everything all right? Yeah, just wanted to check in. These rules, are they for real? Or is this some kind of initiation? I tried to keep my tone light, but the question hung between us. Tom chuckled, but there was an edge to it. You think I'd waste time writing up a prank list? Just follow them. Trust me. I pressed. The thing about the window, what's that about? And the static? I mean, weird stuff happens in old buildings, but he cut me off. You'll get used to it. The rules are there for a reason. Don't overthink it. Just keep the music going and don't break the pattern. I wanted to argue, to demand a real explanation, but Tom's voice had gone flat, final. You'll be fine. Just don't get curious. Curiosity's what gets people in trouble out there. He hung up, leaving me with the dial tone and a fresh wave of irritation. I spun in my chair, eyeing the playlist. The next song was a harmless oldie, but the urge to test the boundaries gnawed at me. What would happen if I skipped the weather report? Or played Midnight Train again just to see? I hovered over the controls, finger poised above the button. The normal part of my brain, the part that believed in logic and coincidence, told me nothing would happen. The rest of me, the part that remembered the whispering static and the child's warning, hesitated. I tried to distract myself by reading the community bulletin, but even that fell off. The words blurred, and I kept losing my place. I glanced at the studio window, catching my own reflection. For a split second, I thought I saw movement behind me, a flicker, gone as soon as I turned. The phone rang again, making me jump. I answered, voice tight. KXRC, who's calling? Silence. Then a low, distorted voice. Don't break the rules. The line went dead. I slammed the receiver down, heart pounding. Maybe it was a prank, maybe not. Either way, the tension was getting to me. I forced myself to follow the schedule, reading the weather at the top of the hour, playing the right songs, and keeping my eyes off the window. But the doubt lingered, a constant itch at the back of my mind. The rules felt like a cage, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they were the only thing keeping something worse at bay. The night stretched on, every minute thick with the possibility of something going wrong. The clock on the console crept toward 2:30 a.m., and the playlist was running thin. My nerves were frayed, every shadow in the studio stretching longer, every creak in the walls echoing louder. I tried to convince myself it was just the isolation, the late hour, the power of suggestion. But the rules gnawed at me, each one a dare I couldn't quite ignore. That's when the request line blinked again. I hesitated, remembering the rule about nameless callers, but curiosity won out. I picked it up. KXRC, who's calling? Silence. Then a voice, soft, familiar, almost soothing. It's me. Play Midnight Train. Please. The line crackled, and I realized with a jolt that it was my sister's voice. She lived 3 states away, had no idea I was working this shift, and certainly wouldn't be calling at this hour. My skin prickled, but the longing in her voice was so real, so desperate, that I found myself scrolling to the song. The rule was clear, never play Midnight Train after 12:30. But it was just a song, I told myself. Just a coincidence. I queued it up, pressed play, and leaned back, waiting for the guilt to fade. The first notes drifted through the speakers, but something was wrong. The melody warped, slowing and deepening, as if the record were melting. The lights in the studio flickered, and the air grew cold, breath fog cold, even though the heater was humming. The static returned, louder than before, and this time the whispers were unmistakable. Dozens of voices, layered and urgent, speaking over each other in a language I couldn't understand. I reached for the mic to cut the feed, but my hand froze. The clock on the wall spun wildly, numbers blurring, and the console lights blinked in a pattern that made no sense. The song kept playing, but the lyrics twisted, the words turning into a garbled chant. I tried to stand, but my legs felt rooted to the floor. The studio window, which I'd been so careful to avoid, drew my gaze. In the glass, I saw not my own reflection, but a crowd of faces, pale, hollow-eyed, mouths moving in silent screams. They pressed against the glass from the other side, their hands smearing the surface, their eyes fixed on me. I tore my gaze away, heart hammering, but the image burned behind my eyelids. The phone rang again, shrill and insistent. I snatched it up, desperate for a lifeline. "Hello." My own voice answered back, distorted and echoing. "You broke the rule. Now you're part of the signal." The line went dead, replaced by high-pitched whine that drilled into my skull. The studio door rattled, hinges groaning as if something heavy leaned against it. I stumbled to the console, fumbling for the jingle, the weather report, anything to reset the pattern. The static surged, drowning out every sound, and the faces in the window began to fade, replaced by a single, shadowy figure standing just beyond the glass. I forced myself to follow the rules, even as panic clawed at my throat. I played the jingle, read the weather, and recited the sign-off phrase, voice shaking. The static receded, the lights steadied, and the cold ebbed away, leaving me gasping and drenched in sweat. The song ended. The studio fell silent, and the clock resumed its slow, steady tick. I stared at the console, hands trembling, the weight of what I'd done settling over me. The rules weren't just superstition. They were a barrier, a thin line between the ordinary and something far more dangerous. I'd crossed it, and the station had answered. The night was far from over, and now I knew. One mistake was all it took to let something in. I sat frozen in the chair, the afterimage of those faces still flickering in my mind. The studio was silent now, but it was the kind of silence that pressed in on you, thick and watchful. I wiped sweat from my brow, hands shaking as I checked the playlist, desperate to re-establish some sense of order. I played the next song, a harmless old ballad, and forced myself to read the weather again, voice barely steady. The routine helped, but only a little. The air felt charged, as if the station itself was waiting for me to slip up again. The static returned, softer this time, but persistent. It crept in at the edges of every song, a whispering undercurrent that made it impossible to relax. I leaned in, headphones pressed tight, trying to make out the words. At first, it was just noise, but then I caught fragments, names, dates, snippets of old broadcasts. My own name, repeated over and over, woven through the static like a warning. I remembered the binder Tom had given me, the pages I'd skimmed in my rush to get started. I flipped through it now, searching for anything that might explain what was happening. Near the back, I found a section labeled Incident Reports. The entries were brief, clinical, but the pattern was unmistakable. March 1997, DJ failed to play the jingle at midnight. Reported hearing voices in the static. Disappeared during shift. October 2003, night operator answered a call from an unnamed caller. Equipment malfunctioned, and the operator was found unconscious. June 2011, weather report skipped at 2 a.m. Static increased. The operator claimed to see figures in the window. Resigned the next day, never returned. Each report ended the same way. Rule violation. Unexplained phenomena. Staff replacement required. My skin crawled. The rules weren't just tradition. They were a survival guide, written in the aftermath of every mistake. I wondered how many more incidents had gone unreported, how many voices in the static belonged to people who'd sat in this very chair. The static grew louder, the whispers more insistent. I tried to ignore it, but the words became clearer, forming sentences that made my blood run cold. You're not the first. You won't be the last. Let us in. The lights flickered, and the temperature dropped again, breath frosting in the air. I scanned the studio, searching for anything out of place. The cassette labeled Night Signal caught my eye, its masking tape label faded but unmistakable. The rules said to play it at 3:33 a.m., but the urge to listen now was overwhelming. Maybe it held a clue, a way to undo what I'd done. I reached for the tape, but the static surged, a chorus of voices screaming in my ears. Not yet. Not yet. I jerked my hand back, heart pounding. The clock read 3:10. I had 23 minutes to wait, 23 minutes to keep the station and myself together. The phone rang again, the sound sharp and urgent. I hesitated, then answered, bracing for another distorted voice. Instead, it was Tom, his voice tight with fear. You broke a rule, didn't you? I swallowed, unable to lie. I played the wrong song. I'm sorry. He cut me off. Listen to me. Don't leave the studio. Don't answer any more calls unless you hear a name. And whatever you do, play the night signal at 3:33. It's the only thing that resets the pattern. Do you understand? I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. What happens if I don't? He was silent for a long moment. You don't want to find out. Just hold on. You're almost through the worst of it. The line went dead, and I was alone again, the static swirling around me like a living thing. I clung to the rules, reading them over and over, each word a lifeline. The faces in the window didn't return, but I could feel them watching, waiting for another mistake. The minutes crawled by, every second stretched thin by fear. The static ebbed and flowed, sometimes fading to a whisper, sometimes rising to a scream. I played the songs, read the weather, and kept my eyes off the window, every action a prayer that I could make it to 3:33 without another slip. As the clock ticked closer to the appointed time, the static reached a fever pitch, the voices chanting in unison. Play the signal. Play the signal. Play the signal. My hands shook as I loaded the cassette, heart hammering in my chest. I understand now. The rules weren't just about keeping the station running. They were about keeping something out, something that wanted in. Every violation was an invitation, every mistake a crack in the barrier. I was just the latest in a long line of night DJs, each one clinging to the rules, each one hoping to make it to dawn. The clock hit 3:33. I pressed play, praying it would be enough. The cassette whirred to life, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then a low, droning tone filled the studio, vibrating through the floor and up my spine. The static on the monitors faded, replaced by a deep, pulsing hum that seemed to sync with my heartbeat. I gripped the edge of the console, knuckles white, as the air in the room thickened, pressing against my chest. The lights flickered, then dimmed to a sickly yellow. The temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath, each exhale a ghost in the gloom. The hum from the tape grew louder, layered with faint voices, hundreds of them, whispering in a language I didn't know but somehow understood. They spoke of hunger, of waiting, of doors left open and rules broken. I realized, with a cold certainty, that the night signal wasn't just a recording. It was a warning, a ritual, a last line of defense. The studio window darkened, the reflection swallowed by a shadow that pressed against the glass from the outside. I forced myself not to look directly, but I could see movement in the corner of my eye, shapes shifting, faces forming and dissolving, hands reaching for the barrier. The static returned, sharper now, slicing through the hum like a blade. The voices in the static screamed my name, over and over, each repetition more desperate, more furious. The door to the hallway rattled, hinges groaning as if something massive leaned against it. I remembered Tom's warning, "Don't leave the studio." I pressed my back to the console, heart pounding, as the door handle twisted back and forth. The rules, I thought. Stick to the rules. I recited them in my head like a mantra, clinging to each one as the only thing keeping me sane. The night signal reached its crescendo, the hum rising to a shriek that made my teeth ache. The lights strobed, casting the studio in a stuttering nightmare of shadows. The phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the chaos. I hesitated, then remembered, only answering if they said their name. The phone rang again, and this time, a voice called out, clear and terrified. "Sam, it's Tom. Pick up." Relief flooded me, and I snatched the receiver. "Tom, what do I do?" My voice was barely more than a whisper. "Don't stop the tape. No matter what happens, let it play through. And whatever you do, don't look at the window. Don't answer the door. You're almost there. Just hold on." The line went dead, and the static surged, louder than ever. The shadow at the window pressed closer, the glass bowing inward as if it might shatter. The door thudded, each blow rattling the walls. The voices in the static changed, pleading now, promising anything if I'd just open the door, just look at the window, just break one more rule. I shut my eyes, blocking out the flickering lights, the pounding door, the voices that sounded like my family, my friends, even my own voice. I focused on the tape, on the rules, on the thin thread of hope that if I just held on, the night would end. The night signal's shriek peaked, then cut off abruptly. Silence crashed down, heavy and absolute. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. The temperature rose, the air losing its oppressive weight. I opened my eyes, blinking in the sudden calm. The shadow at the window was gone. The door was still, the handle unmoving. The static faded, replaced by the gentle hum of the equipment. I slumped in the chair, every muscle trembling, tears stinging my eyes. I'd made it. I'd followed the rules, clung to them like a lifeline, and survived the test. But the relief was short-lived. The phone rang again, softer this time. I answered, voice raw. "KXRC, who's calling?" A woman's voice, gentle and unfamiliar, replied, "Thank you for keeping us safe." For now. The line went dead, and I stared at the receiver, heart pounding. The words echoed in my mind, "for now." I looked at the clock. 3:59 a.m. The shift wasn't over yet. I forced myself to finish the routine, read the weather, play the last songs, sign off exactly as the rules demanded. Each action felt like a ritual, a ward against the darkness pressing in from the edges of the world. As dawn crept over the horizon, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the studio window, painting the room in gold. The sense of menace faded, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. I leaned back, letting the warmth wash over me, grateful for the ordinary sounds of the waking world. But I knew, deep down, that the rules were more than just guidelines. They were a shield, fragile and imperfect, holding back something that waited in the static, in the shadows, in the spaces between songs. I'd survived the night, but the threat was never truly gone. The rules would have to be followed again and again by whoever sat in this chair next. I gathered my things, the list of rules folded carefully in my pocket. As I stepped out into the morning light, I glanced back at the station, its red tower light blinking steadily against the sky. I wondered how many others had faced the same test, how many had failed, how many voices in the static were waiting for another chance. I walked to my car, the world feeling both safer and infinitely more dangerous. I'd made it through the final broadcast, but I knew the story wasn't over. Not for me, not for KXRC, not for whatever waited just beyond the reach of the signal. The sun was up by the time I finally left the studio, its pale light washing the frost from the parking lot and turning the radio tower's red beacon into something almost ordinary. I moved slowly, every muscle aching, my mind replaying the night in jagged flashes, the warped song, the faces in the glass, the voices in the static. I kept expecting some final trick, some last whisper from the darkness, but the only sound was the crunch of gravel under my boots and the distant call of a morning bird. Inside my car, I sat for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the station's squat silhouette. I thought about the rules, how I'd scoffed at them just hours before, how I'd nearly broken more than one out of boredom or doubt. Now, each rule felt like a scar, a reminder of how thin the line was between the world I knew and the one that pressed in from the shadows. I checked my phone. No missed calls, no messages, as if the world outside the station had kept turning, oblivious to what had happened. I wondered if Tom would call, if he'd offer comfort, or just another warning. I wondered how many others had left this place changed, carrying the weight of what they'd seen and heard. Driving home, the landscape looked the same as it had the night before, but I was different. I flinched at the static on the radio, jumped at the sight of my own reflection in the rearview mirror. I kept the list of rules in my pocket, folded and worn, unable to throw it away. It felt like a talisman, or maybe a curse. Sleep didn't come easy that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the studio window, the faces pressed against the glass, the shadow waiting for another mistake. I knew I'd survived, but I also knew the cost. The rules weren't just for the station, they were for me, too. A promise to never let curiosity or doubt open the door again. The dread lingered, a quiet echo in the back of my mind. I'd made it through the night, but I understood now. The rules were all that stood between me and the static, and I would never break them again. A week later, I found myself back at KXRC, this time in daylight, the building looking smaller and less menacing under the sun. Tom greeted me with a nod, but his eyes lingered on the list of rules I clutched in my hand. "Are you ready to show the new guy around?" he asked. I nodded, though my stomach twisted with unease. The new hire was young, eager, and full of questions, just like I'd been. I walked him through the studio, pointing out the quirks of the equipment, the best way to keep the coffee machine from overflowing. When we reached the console, I handed him the folded list. "These are the broadcast rules," I said, my voice steady. "Read them. Follow them. No exceptions." He laughed, glancing at the paper. "Is this some kind of hazing thing?" I shook my head, meeting his eyes. "No, it's not a joke. If you want to make it through the night, you'll do exactly what it says. Trust me." He shrugged, tucking the list into his pocket, already half distracted by the blinking lights on the board. I watched him settle into the chair, headphones on, ready to take over. As I stepped outside, the wind picked up, carrying a faint whisper of static from the tower. I paused, glancing back at the studio window. For a moment, I thought I saw a pale face reflected in the glass, watching, waiting. I turned away, heart pounding, certain of only one thing. The cycle wasn't over. Not for KXRC. not for anyone who dared to break the rules.